All right, friends, we are going to read chapters 22 and 23 of Tale of Despereaux today, and this will finish up that second book. Remember how this book is actually broken into three parts. First, the perspective of Despereaux, then the perspective of Ruscaro, then the third perspective of a character we haven't met yet, and then we kind of see how they all kind of link together and come back together. So this is the end of Ruscaro's point of view. So let's read chapter 22. Let's take a listen. Chapter 22. He put his heart together again. Ruscaro hurried from the banquet hall. A rat, he said. He put a paw over his heart. I am a rat, and there is no light for rats. There will be no light for me. The king's men were still bent over the queen. The king was still shouting, "Save her! Save her!" And the queen was still dead, of course, when Ruscaro encountered the queen's royal soup spoon lying on the floor. "I will have something beautiful," he said aloud. "I am a rat, but I will have something that is beautiful. I will have a crown of my own." He picked up the spoon and he put it on his head. Don't know if you can really see the picture, friends, but he took the spoon and put it on his head like a crown. "Yes," said Ruscaro, "I will have something beautiful, and I will have revenge. Both things, somehow." There are those hearts, reader, that never mend again once they are broken. Or if they do mend, they heal themselves in a crooked, lopsided way, as if sewn together by a careless craftsman. Such was the fate of Churrascaro. His heart was broken. Picking up the spoon and placing it on his head, speaking of revenge, these things helped him to put his heart together again. But it was, alas, put together wrong. "Where is the rat?" shouted the king. "Find that rat!" "If you want me," muttered Ruscaro as he left the banquet hall, "I will be in the dungeon in the darkness." Chapter 23. Consequences. So consequences are things that happen as a result of something. Sometimes there's good consequences. Sometimes, like if I do a really good job on one of my tests, I might get the consequence of an A plus, or my parents would say, "Wow, you did a great job on your report card." A consequence of that might be I get to go get ice cream with them as a reward. Consequences can also be negative, where if you don't turn in your homework, maybe you have to stay in for Fun Friday, or if you hurt somebody's feelings, you have to stay on the wall. And talk it out with them. Or if you don't clean your room, maybe you don't get to go outside with your friends until it's done. So there's a consequence. And I'm wondering if these are going to be good consequences or bad consequences, but I bet you we'll find out. So chapter 23 is called Consequences. There were, of course, dire consequences of Ruscaro's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. For instance, the young Ruscaro gnawed, that means chewed, on Gregory the jailer's rope, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face, and because a match was lit in his soul was set afire. The rat's soul was set afire, and because of this, he journeyed up the stairs, seeking the light. Upstairs in the banquet hall, the Princess P spotted him and called out the word rat, and because of this, Ruscaro fell into the queen's soup. And because the rat fell in the queen's soup, the queen died. You see, can't you, how everything is related to everything else? Can you see quite clearly how every action has a consequence? For instance, if, reader, you will indulge me and allow me to continue this meditation on consequences, because the queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup. And because soup was outlawed, so were all of the instruments involved in making and eating soup. All spoons and bowls and kettles, these things were collected from all of the people in the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled high in the dungeon. And because Ruscaro was dazzled by the light of one match, and journeyed upstairs and fell into the queen's soup, and the queen died, the king ordered the death of every rat in the land. The king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats, but the thing about killing a rat is that you must first find a rat. And if a rat does not want to be found, reader, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded in only getting lost in the dungeon's treacherous mazes. Some of them, in fact, did not ever find their way out again and died there in the dark heart of the castle. And so the killing of all rats was not very successful. In desperation, King Philip declared that rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, was a ridiculous law, as rats are outlaws to begin with. How can you outlaw an outlaw? It's a waste of time and energy, but still, the king officially decreed that all rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you're a king, you may make as many ridiculous laws as you like. That is what being king is all about. But, reader, we must not forget that King Philip loved the queen and that without her, he was lost. This is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. Making soup illegal, outlawing rats, these are things that soothe the poor king's heart, and so we must forgive him. And what of the outlawed rats? What of one outlawed rat in particular? What of Churrasco? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in his nest with the spoon atop his head. He set to work, fashioning for himself a kingly cape made out of the scrap of red tablecloth. And as he worked, an old one-eyed Botticelli Remercero sat next to him, swinging his locket back and forth, saying, "You see what comes from rats who go upstairs? I hope you have learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer." "Yes," muttered Roscoe. "Yes, that is exactly what I intend to do. I will make the princess suffer for how she looked at me." And as Roscoe worked and planned, the jailer Gregory held tight to his rope and made his own way through the darkness. And in a dank cell, the prisoner who had once had a red tablecloth and now had nothing, spent his days and nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon, upstairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone one evening as his brothers and sisters sniffed for crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to the sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. There would be consequences of the mouse's love for music. You, reader, know already some of those consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to a princess. He would fall in love. And, speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood inside the castle hearing music for the very first time, outside the castle, in the gloom of dusk, more consequences were drawing near. A wagon driven by a king's soldier and piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles was making its way to the castle. And beside the soldier there sat a young girl with ears that looked like nothing so much as pieces of cauliflower stuck to either side of her head. The girl's name, reader, was Miggery Sow, and though she did not yet know it, she would be instrumental in helping the rat work his revenge. So that is the end of book 2, which is Roscoe's point of view, and we kind of got introduced to the third perspective that we're going to see. We are going to see the perspective of Miggery Sow. So that's what's coming up next. All right, we'll have to hear more tomorrow.